tough and they're really rough and nothing's working, but there's something inside of you that says, I just have to follow that because you don't know who you're going to be.
Welcome to the Binge on Self-Love podcast. My name is Anna, but you can call me Anshi, and thank you so much for tuning in. Binge on Self-Love podcast is about navigating binge eating disorder struggles, disordered eating, and negative body image. Although I share my personal experience with having a negative body image, eating disorders, and I do uncover bits of my personal story, this podcast is not as much about me as it is about you. Beautiful human beings who struggle, who fight, who grow, and who evolve every single day. This podcast is for anyone who wants to feel supported on their recovery journey and simply for anyone who's trying to improve their relationship with themselves. I believe together we can turn something so negative, such as binge eating, into something more positive and hopefully go from binging on food and self-hatred to binging on self-love. Subscribe to the Binge on Self-Love podcast on your favorite platform and tune in every Tuesday for a new episode.
But there's something inside of you that says, I just have to follow that because you don't know who you're going to be.
Disclaimer: Binge on Self-Love podcast is intended for informational purposes only. It doesn't provide professional medical advice and it is not a substitute for diagnosis or treatment. In this podcast, we cover the topic of eating disorders, so if you find this topic triggering, it may be better for you not to listen to this podcast. Always make sure to put your mental health first. Hello everyone, my name is Anna, but you can call me Anshi. I'll be your host and welcome back to the Binge on Self-Love podcast. If you're new here, Binge on Self-Love podcast is a podcast where we talk about everything related to eating disorders, recovery, self-acceptance, and also about changing our lives for the better. So if that's something you're interested in, you came to the right place. Make sure you subscribe to the Binge on Self-Love podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Google Podcasts, or any other platform so you don't miss any future episodes. I've talked a lot about recovering from an eating disorder throughout this podcast, how it has been for me, how we shouldn't wait for the perfect moment to start our recovery journey, and how I see the self-acceptance and self-love as a journey itself rather than some milestone that we are supposed to reach. But what I haven't talked about yet is how the loved ones, the family members, partners, friends, and even colleagues can support someone suffering from an eating disorder and someone who's currently in the recovery. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Recovery is hard. Everyone who's been through it or anyone who's going through one right now will most probably agree. It's challenging for both our mental health as well as our physical health. And having someone by your side who's supportive and encouraging can be very, very helpful. But I also know that it can be really confusing and hard for those whose loved ones are struggling with an eating disorder because you love them and you want to help them. But one thing I've learned dealing with an addicted family member is that you may want to help someone you love and care for as much as you want, but unless they are those who really want to make that change, then all your effort comes in vain. That person struggling with an eating disorder or with an addiction has to be the one who says, okay, I have this problem and I want to get better, or I want to get help. It's different if you are a parent and your minor child is suffering with an eating disorder. Then I think the parent probably has to take more responsibility and more control over the situation. But when you're dealing with an adult, that's ultimately up to them to decide if they want to get better. I put together a couple of tips that you, as someone whose loved one is currently going through an eating disorder recovery, can do to support them. My first tip is to just be there for them and show them that you care. I think that for someone who's going through an eating disorder or who's in the recovery, it is really important to see that there's someone by their side who's not going to judge them or the situation that they are in, but is just there by their side, supporting their recovery. We're often quick to jump to a conclusion that if we haven't dealt with that problem ourselves, in this case with the eating disorder, then we cannot understand what the person is going through. But I think we don't really need to fully understand. We just need to be there for them and make sure they know that when they feel alone or anxious or stressed out or lost on their recovery journey, we are there to have their back, ready to give them the support they need. When I was 17, 18 and recovering from anorexia, my dad didn't really understand how could anyone develop an eating disorder, but he was there for me every step of the way, just like my mom. My dad would drive me to the therapy sessions with a psychologist. He would weigh me every couple of days just to make sure I was gaining weight according to the plan I was supposed to follow. He would ask me like, did you eat? What did you have? And sometimes he would even cook and bring me some food on his own just to make sure that I did eat. And of course, he could probably do some things better or do some things differently, but it's the effort and the support that he showed me that really matters. My mom was always listening to my rants about my weight and how uncomfortable I was feeling in my body. And although it must have been really hard for her to listen to her daughter saying she hates herself all the time, she's been there for me, listening, comforting me, and just really being there for me. And both my parents have supported me, and I am incredibly grateful to them for that. Of course, that at first I quote-unquote hated them for getting involved in what I ate and when and how much I weighed. I felt like they didn't understand that I was just trying to stay lean or whatever. But from the long-term perspective, I am really grateful for their support, because they could have just told me something like, okay, so this is just some teenager thing, she'll grow out of it, or something similarly stupid. So just being there, listening, showing that you care and that you take your loved one's struggles seriously is one of the best things you can do to support them on their recovery journey. This brings me to my next point, which is that you don't always have to provide an advice. Just listening is more than enough. I've noticed that we humans love to talk and we love to give other people advice. And very often in the middle of listening to someone, we are already preparing what we're going to respond and how we're going to react, instead of fully focusing on that person and what they have to say. I think especially with eating disorder recovery or addiction recovery, it's the best to leave the advice to the professionals and just focus on listening to your loved ones and what they have to say. I mean, I was complaining all the time during the early stage of the recovery, but I also know that just being given the space to do so helped me in a great way, because I didn't have to be alone with my thoughts. I had someone I could talk to, tell them how I was feeling, and that itself was already helpful to me. So don't feel pressured that you constantly need to be giving advice to your loved ones. Quite the opposite, just be there with an open mind, give them the support they need, and listen. That's more than enough. My tip number 3 is to not make any comments on anybody's weight, shape, appearance, or eating habits. Not on your loved ones, not on anybody else. And I really want to put an emphasis on this point, because the state of mind of someone going through an eating disorder or an eating disorder recovery is often so fragile that any comments can disrupt their belief that recovery is the right way. I can of course only speak for myself, but I can tell you that the comments or someone's weight or appearance can do more harm than good. Comments like, "But you don't look like you have an eating disorder," are one of the worst ones. First, an eating disorder doesn't come in a certain weight or size or shape. And 2, what the hell? Would you tell someone who's, for example, struggling with an alcohol addiction, "Oh, but you don't look like you're drunk enough, you know"? No, so please don't make any comments on someone's weight or shape or appearance. Also, those comments that you make out of worry about someone, such as, you're so thin, you're so skinny, those are often the comments that can actually encourage that person in sticking with their crazy eating habits, because it shows them that when they are that skinny, you care. You show them your attention, you give them that quote unquote praise. That's why I try to avoid commenting on someone's weight even when I think they look great. For example, a friend of mine has recently lost a significant amount of weight, and even though I think she looks stunning and I'm happy for her being happy, I haven't told her anything about her weight because I don't want her to ever think that she wasn't pretty or good enough before. I don't want her to come to a conclusion that being this weight means people like you more. I try to praise her with comments like, I really like your shirt, or this color really suits you, or I like your hair, or whatever. Just something that shows her that I have nice things to say about her, but they also have nothing to do with how much she weighs or what shape her body has. Also, try to avoid commenting on how much or how little you think someone is eating, unless that person specifically asks for your opinion. Again, it's going to be a little different in case you are a parent or a person responsible for a minor child, but other than that, any comments on how much someone is eating can be harmful. So please, please, please avoid any comments on someone's weight and shape. And not just the comments directed at your loved one, but comments on anybody's weight or eating habits for that matter. My tip number 4 is don't simplify the complicated situation. When we don't understand something, we tend to simplify it. Like, I bet he or she's doing this to get the attention, or it's just a phase, he'll grow out of it. Mental health is not that super simple, although I don't want to say it's overcomplicated either, but we don't get to see everything that's going on in someone's life, let alone in someone's head. And what may seem obvious to you may not be so obvious to someone else. So please try to avoid giving someone advice like, just start eating normally, it's not such a big of a deal, or if you would have more willpower, you wouldn't be binging, or something like that. That's really not helpful to anyone in any way. My tip number 5 is to learn about eating disorder yourself. I think learning more about the issue that your loved one is dealing with is going to help you understand them so much better. Luckily, we live in an age where there are tons of resources, podcasts, YouTube videos, interviews, books, and centers where we can learn more about the eating disorders and what our loved ones may be going through and what we can do to support them. And I think in the case of supporting someone on the recovery, it's the best not to rely just on your idea what's the best for that person, but rather learning about what that person may be going through and what we can do to help them. Like I've mentioned earlier, we may give someone an advice with a good intention. It may come across in a completely wrong way. So it's always better to educate yourself and get as much information on the issue as possible. And my very last tip, tip number 6, is more of a personal one, and that's to show your loved one what life without an eating disorder has to offer. What I mean by this is that the recovery process in itself is very time and energy and emotion consuming, and it can get overwhelming at times. And what can be a great way how to ease the mind of your loved one can be to show them what life without an eating disorder has to offer. Just going out, going to see a movie, hanging out with a friend, making a spontaneous trip, whatever it may be that you think your loved one will enjoy, can be a great way how to take their mind off of the recovery for a little bit in a good way. And show them that the life without an eating disorder has so much more to offer than a life with an eating disorder. Of course, don't pressure them to anything that they don't feel ready for. if they have just started their recovery journey, maybe they won't feel comfortable yet eating out. But I think making happy memories together and just enjoying the time you spend together can also be a great way how to support someone going through the recovery. So to summarize the tips on how you can support someone who's currently in the recovery from an eating disorder are: number 1, be there, listen, and show your support. Number 2, don't judge and try to have an open mind. Number 3, don't comment on anybody's weight or body or shape or appearance. Number 4, don't simplify the situation your loved one is going through. Number 5, educate yourself about the eating disorder to better understand what your loved one may be going through. And number 6, show them that the life without an eating disorder is so much more fulfilling and happier than with an eating disorder. So that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to subscribe to the Binge on Self-Love podcast and rate it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or any other platform, because it's going to help me grow this podcast and spread it among more people. If you have any tips on episodes that you would like me to cover, feel free to DM me on Instagram at Binge on Self-Love. I'll be back next Tuesday with another Binge on Self-Love episode. Until then, take care and have a great rest of the week. Bye!
You have to be your biggest fan. And when things are really tough and they're really rough and nothing's working, but there's something inside of you that says, I just have to follow that. Because you don't know who